Hello friendos and friendettes, it is Omega, and today I wanted to discuss a little bit about 2D platformers. So, recently, mostly when I say recently, I mean within the past 2 years or so, I've noticed that there's kind of been a massive proliferation of 2D platform games. And recently, I think a couple months back from the time of recording, about like August or July, I decided to go through Steam's catalog and take a look at all the games that have been labeled as 2D platformers or 2D puzzle games or something to that effect that have 2D platforming elements to them. And what I found was that there were, at the time, over 100 different 2D platformer games that had been released in 2014 alone onto Steam. Now, that seems a little bit excessive to me, especially when you consider that the average number of games that are released to a specific genre of gaming within a year are usually like 30, 40, maybe 50, maybe 60, if there's like a lot of development houses getting pushed toward them. But not 90, not over 100. That's just incredibly excessive. So when I saw that, I figured, okay, I should probably look into this a little bit and figure out why are these so prolific. You know, there has to be a reason as to why so many devs are deciding to make these. And what I boiled it down to, and that I'll describe here, is that it's basically the same thing as to why indie devs, it's the same reason that indie devs will make little low-budget horror games. It's the same reason. The reason is, at its core, is that it's cheap to make, and that ultimately it will fund larger projects. And that's something that's been done in pretty much all media forms for a very, very long time. That's not new to video games, and that's definitely not new to this kind of thing. Like, even big production houses for, like, movies will usually make a couple of cheap little movies, like horror movies, or they'll make, like, knockoff movies or something, before they get enough money. Or even directors will do this before they get enough money to go in and make bigger budget kind of movies or bigger budget vignettes or something. Peter Jackson, for example, director of all of the Lord of the Rings movies thus far, he started out making really cheap, low-budget, campy horror films, the names of which completely elude me, and he realized that there wasn't a lot of artistic merit to them, and they weren't, good necessarily. They weren't going to win any awards, but he realized that, they would draw in enough of an audience and they'd make enough money where he could eventually get funded to make larger projects, and he did. Hence his signing on with New Line Cinema to make the Lord of the Rings movies. So the reasoning behind why these games are so prevalent is because the studios need money, and this is the easiest way to have them make money without them having to make, like, total risks on all of their ventures. Because if every studio decided to go out and make, like, an FPS or something, it's a lot riskier because there are already dominant games in those genres on the market, and that will just completely steamroll them in importance, and they probably wouldn't make enough money. There aren't a lot of 2D platformers, or anything really, that are dominating the 2D platformer genre. There are very popular ones, such as Trine 2, Super Meat Boy, what was that game that released recently? Oh, Rayman Origins. Games like that. They're popular, but they're not completely crushing the 2D platformer genre as are other games in other genres. So there is a bit of a market for it there, even though that market is saturated, because you have to do a little bit more to appeal to the audience, and you can actually appeal to the, or I suppose the consumers for 2D platformers more easily than you could with an FPS, because of course you're competing against much larger, better products. So of course there's an obvious reason as to why indie studios will want to make these games. Now, though I mentioned that there are about 90 games, well actually there's way more than that, there's over 100 games currently on the Steam market that are 2D platformers or 2D puzzlers. Those games are very, very variable in their quality, and some of them range from incredibly terrible to pretty good. But the general trend, the average for most of these games, the average quality, is that they're all pretty just mundane. They're mundane, they're average, they're boring, they're mediocre, there's nothing that really sets them apart. Aside from maybe one or two elements, and that's what usually these platformers rely on. So 2D platformers nowadays, because there are so many of them because it's such a prolific genre, what they'll usually do is they will go for one thing that they can do different from the other 2D platformers, and when they do, and they just settle on that one thing, and they will try to do that one thing very well to set themselves apart. And usually they do that one thing very well. So certain games will rely on their art style, certain games will rely on their sound design, certain games will rely on maybe 1 or 2 game mechanics, some of them will just rely on something as simple as like animation to set themselves apart from everything else. And that's fine, but it's not enough. It's not enough to set your game apart in enough of a way to make your game more interesting than the rest of the average. See, the thing that makes Trine, a game like Trine, or a game like Super Meat Boy, what makes them really interesting is their combination of different aspects that really makes them very good. There are not a lot of games can tackle the speed or risk of Super Meat Boy. Not a lot of games can match up to its pretty good soundtrack, in my opinion. Not a lot of games can match up to the art style or puzzle elements or the switching mechanic of Trine. Not a lot of games can match up to the art style or the character design or the game mechanics of Rayman Origins, and etc. So usually, as I said, these games will only do one thing distinctive really well that sets them apart from everything else. And I'm not saying every game is the same, I'm saying that every game has a mediocre set of aspects to it that are kind of as mediocre as everything else, and then one thing exceptional. And again, that one thing is not enough. It just keeps it in the mediocre place. So that's unfortunate. Do I think that 2D platformers could be very good if they got out of their box? Maybe. The problem is that, and I will establish this now, I am heavily biased against 2D platformers because I personally do not find them very fun. And it's not down to platforming. I don't actually mind platforming that much. I know a lot of people have issues with platforming in video games. I don't. I find it fun. I enjoy the challenge of it. I enjoy the little nuances of it. And I enjoy puzzling too. I don't mind the puzzle aspects of 2D platformer or puzzler games. The problem I more take is I'm just bored of them. I'm burnt out on them. It's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy. So many of the games have been created, and I've played so many of them in just doing research or just playing them for fun, that I have been burnt out on them, and I just have no interest in playing them anymore because I've played the genre so many times. I'm sick of it. I don't care anymore. I'm getting to that point with FPS and TPS because I've played so many of them as well. It's a burnout with the genre more than it is anything else that's driven me away from 2D platformers, so I've just stopped playing them. And I don't really like them. I've kind of been just, dissuaded from them because I'm so bored of the mechanics. So I'm biased in that sense. But I can understand and recognize when a game is genuinely good over just being absolute dreck and terrible. Now, video game devs need to eat. And I understand that. We all need to eat. We all like food. We all like housing. We all like basic necessities. Those are all very good things to us. We kind of need those as human beings. We have a certain, necessity. We have certain necessities that we have to fulfill. And yes, I'm being facetious. So I understand that video game devs would need to make these games, because if you do anything else, it's probably pretty risky, as I said before. But, and if you want my opinion, it seems like a waste of resources. Now, don't think that I'm saying that, indie game devs are just being complete idiots and wasting all their time and effort on stuff that doesn't mean anything. Because I'm not. As I said before, it has purpose. I just think that with so many games coming out that do try to do something separate from their competition, it just seems like you could channel that effort into something so much better than a 2D platformer. And I'm a person that has a lot of ideas about video games. I don't have the talent to make video games. I don't have programming or design skills or anything. And I kind of feel this way about art in general. When I see an artist or a creator of any sort funnel their efforts into something that I feel is subpar and wasteful, when they could be making something beautiful and grand and engrossing and powerful, like any other video game, it kind of makes me just sad. It kind of deters me from the whole thing, because then I realize, this person has so much more talent than I do, and yet they're putting it towards something that I hate so much. And it just makes me depressed. Not, you know, literally, not like full-on depression, but it just saddens me to think that there's so much more talent than what I have, and it's being put towards something so pointless. Because at this point, 2D platformers, I feel, are kind of pointless. If anyone wants to speak up against me and say that, you know, oh, well, there's like this entire community of several 100,000 people that are still playing, you know, 2D platformers, and they're incredibly popular and blah, blah, blah. If you want to bring up evidence that that's the case and present it to me, go ahead, because I'm not seeing it anywhere. It just does not seem that anyone cares about 2D platformers. Again, maybe that's due to their proliferation on the market. I personally think it's due to their being just generally boring compared to other games. There's some other genres are generally more interesting than 2D platformers. They get a little bit mundane and samey after a while, so I think it's more down to that. But if you can bring up examples of where people are kind of just flocking to 2D platformers, and there's like a reason that this market is so strong, and that there's a reason that there are so many of these games, please bring it up, because I'd be interested to know. The whole point of this commentary is just to bring you what I've seen so far, and to give you my thoughts on why it's the case. Now, originally I had written that it seems like a bit of a cop-out to make one of these games, because it's really easy to do, comparative to everything else. I'm not saying it's easy for me, I'm saying comparative to making, you know, Battlefield 3, it's pretty easy to make a fucking 2D platformer. But maybe that's not the case. You know, I'm not an indie dev, I can't really speak to it, and I'm not going to try to, because I don't know what goes into that. So, I originally had that written down, I'm going to completely scratch that from the record. You know, maybe it's a lot of effort to make a 2D platformer, I don't know. I don't think it's a lot of comparative effort, but it's probably still a lot of effort. Now, the other problem, and I don't want to get into this because this is going to set me on a massive tangent, but I'm going to because it bears mentioning. Early access. Everyone's mentioned why early access is a bad thing. It's, you know, it's not a secret. You know, it's pretty obvious. When you release something into a incomplete state, and then you have it available for purchase, there are so many risks that you can have associated with that, and partially it's the fault of the consumer for buying the game. But when you get to the point where your game has gone 8, 9, 10 months without an update on early access, you're kind of fucking at fault at that point. That's a little bit predatory, or at least it screams at being predatory, because you don't know. The consumer does not know if the indie dev does not update within many months of their game. Say, for example, Starbound. Starbound got released, and it was updated pretty frequently several months into its release. And then around like April of 2013, I think, it kind of stopped. There wasn't much coming out about it at that point. And I realized around that stage that this game is probably not going to get any more updates. This game's probably just going to go dark. And I was mostly right. Up until, and that's why I originally made the Starbound versus Terraria commentary that I made, because I didn't think that that game was going to go anywhere past the point it was after Early Access released it. It didn't seem like it was going to get updated, so I figured, okay, this is probably as complete as the game's going to get. So, I made that video. And then it took about 7 months for them to start releasing new stuff about the game. And you know, that's just cheap. And that's what a lot of indie devs are doing with these 2D platformers on early access. It's just release the game, put it out for like $15, have people buy it, and then just don't update it. Because it's a really easy way to make money and not have to do that much work. And at that point, I say, fuck you. I don't care if you need money to make a more ambitious project later. Fuck you. You're scum. And it does factor in here because a lot of these games are on early access. I think maybe half, at least like a third, are probably on early access by this point. Some of them have made it off it. Most of them haven't. A lot of them were originally on DawnLight. So that tells you something about the quality. And it's kind of led to this predatory market where people just make 2D platformers, release them on early access, and we make a little bit of money, and then we go away and we don't ever update the game. Sorry. Just kind of sucks. So, I think it's a problem of disappointment that I take with 2D platformers. It's that they could be... There's effort, and there is genuine talent behind a lot of these things. A lot of these games that are probably not getting the attention that they deserve, I suppose is the word, even though I don't think they deserve that much. All work kind of deserves attention at some point or another. You know, it's effort, especially if it's quality. And I'm disappointed with the fact that so much effort has gone into something that's probably not going to go anywhere, and probably won't even make that much money. It's probably not going to be that big of a return on investment. And I'm just sad at that. It's a waste, and it's a big, unfortunate waste. And I understand that there's risk involved, but man, you're wasting more money just making 2D platformers. Name's Omega. This ends on a rather sombering note, doesn't it? See you next time.